because women are catching up. They're going, I don't want to be that 7% of people, the 93% of people who didn't negotiate. I want to make sure that I close the gender gap. I don't want to become a victim or a statistic. And so it energizes me to see women showing up and wanting to do better. Unfortunately, we're still stuck with some elements of gender bias, even though our mindset and the words that we use and the things that we see in the media are that women should be treated equally. Subconsciously, society still hasn't caught up. And so while I don't think it should be necessary to teach women to negotiate differently, I'm also not willing to wait another 100 years for society to catch up to how they should be treating us. So my goal in speaking to groups like this is to give you some tips and tricks that will help you expedite getting everything that you want rather than waiting for society to catch up. I would love to hear, for those of you who are present in the chat, I'd love for you to tell me what feelings or even words come to mind when you hear the word negotiation, because it certainly has some certain different connotations for some folks rather than others. So if you can tell me in the chat, and we've got folks from all over the world, which is pretty cool. Tell me in the chat what feeling comes to mind when you hear the word negotiation. Intimidating is like something I see in the chat and something I hear very, very often, especially from women's groups. Rarely do I hear it from men, and I do teach general audiences, as well as, obviously I love talking to women's groups, but my work in the corporate world is for general audiences. This is that intimidation, that combativeness, that competitiveness, that fear is often the biggest word that comes to mind, especially when I'm speaking to women. And one of the reasons is because when you walk into a room, you know you are going to get treated differently. You know there is a risk somebody telling you no, or of somebody rescinding the offer. I have women come to see me during my MBA office hours all the time. And it's only women who come to see me. Men never come to see me during my office hours. And when women come to talk to me about salary negotiations, the first thing they ask is, are you sure I can do this? What if they rescind the offer? Rarely do I hear people outside of a marginalized group say, what if they rescind the offer? And so we know that there's risk, there's a legitimate fear, but I'm going to help you reduce some of those fears. In order to do that, I want to give you a little bit of a lay of the land in terms of the different types of negotiations. So I'm going to get academic on you for just a second. But if you can imagine a spectrum, like a spectrum of light, there's not just one type of negotiation, there are many different types of negotiation. And on one end of the spectrum, we have what we call the dark side of the spectrum. And that is the competitive side of things. That is where it's very narrow in scope. It's very quick. There's no relationship around that. There's very little trust in those types of things. So imagine you're buying a souvenir on a beach vacation, or you're in a market in Morocco buying a carpet or something like that. You're never going to deal with this vendor ever again. You don't have a relationship with them. This is going to be done relatively quickly. There's not going to be a lot of consequences. It's not like you can go back to that person you found on a beach and return that item. There's no warranty associated with it. So it's a quick and dirty, and it's usually associated with something quantitative like cash. But then we have on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have what I consider the more collaborative side of negotiation. And you might hear words like win-win or partnership. Well, in those ones, that's where dependency is quite high. I can't just walk down the beach and find somebody else. Now we're in a partnership together, which means we are dependent on one another. And those partnerships could be the people that we live with, our partners in business. It could be any number of folks with whom we are intertwined and we need each other, whether we like to admit it or not. We have to work with one another. Those are the types of negotiations where it have very little to do with cash. Maybe cash is part of it, but it's a teeny tiny part of it. It could be when you're going to negotiate where you're going to go on vacation with your spouse. It could be negotiating with your child who is driving you crazy, but you can't disown them and just toss them out on the streets. It could be any number of things. It could be maybe you're going to go into a venture with someone and you're going to talk about equity. And equity is not cash. You get to the security elements that are going to surround that equity agreement. So it's not measurable in the middle, some that are a little bit more cold and a little bit more warm. As we get to this more warm side of things, the collaborative side, things are more, so we have this thing called outside the box. You might hear jargon like that. That's where things are more creative, because we also reference something in the middle of the spectrum, terminology that you might hear like growing the pie. Growing the pie is when you go, well, how much value can I put in this pie? And as that pie gets bigger and bigger and bigger, There's more value to go around. At some point, we're still going to have to divide up those slices of pie. As the pie got bigger and there's more in it, there's going to be a lot more side. So there's going to be a moment of I take more, take less, and vice versa, but at least there's more to go around. And so when we're talking about negotiation, there are many different types. And one of the important things to do is to identify what type of negotiation is this. If you're talking about a salary, yes, there's going to be elements of that competitive side because I want as much cash as possible, but maybe I'm going to talk about flexibility. Maybe I'm going to talk about equity. Maybe I'm going to talk about remote work. Maybe I'm going to talk about vacation time and all of these things that will help us creep into the middle of this spectrum. And the bigger that pie gets, the more satisfied everybody will be. When you're thinking about these types of things, another thing to kind of layer onto this is the fact that when it comes to women in negotiation specifically, it is expected that women, when they show up, we expect women to be nurturing. We expect them to be collaborative. We expect them to be accommodating. And that all fits with that more collaborative side of negotiation, that partnership, that win-win kind of stuff. But we're still shocked when we see women on the more competitive side, when we see them talking about things that are quantitative and asking for more money, people are going, what? What? Shouldn't she just be happy that she's out of the kitchen and it's not 1952 anymore? So there's this subconscious bias still attached to women who are indeed going after those more competitive types of negotiations. Whereas even in pop culture references, in movies and TV and media, you see, the stereotypical man in a power suit with the slick back hair, banging his fist on the table. That's completely acceptable in society. We don't second guess that. Those men aren't going, what if they rescind the offer? That's not what they're worried about because we're okay with that. We allow that to happen. And so women, it's almost like I use this analogy of a balance beam. If you can think of gymnastics, women are walking on this tiny balance beam where it's very easy to lose your balance, whereas men get one that's out here. Marginalized groups shrink that balance beam even further. The dominant group, however, gets loads of room to lose their balance, to stumble, to do whatever they want, and they're not going to fall off. But women and marginalized groups have to be much more careful. And so some of the tips I'm going to give today are going to give you the strength and that balance to be able to walk along that balance beam without worrying about, are they going to rescind the offer? How am I going to be perceived this way? But one of the tools to achieving all of this, and it's going to sound really crazy, is finding what I call your mental pause button. And what that means is, if you think back to our cave person ancestors, when they were faced with threats of some kind, it could have been a saber-toothed tiger. What would happen when they were faced with that physical threat is all rational thought would leave their brain and it would go to their limbs. And that's what would allow them to run like hell to get away from that saber-toothed tiger. That's what gave them that superhuman strength in the moment. And today we don't have those same physical threats very often, but we do have intellectual threats to our ego, threats to our well-being, the threat of like, what if they rescind the offer? What if I look stupid? What if they don't like me? All of those are threats that are swimming through our minds. And what happens is our physiology is still built exactly the same way as our cave person ancestors. So all that rational energy leaves our brain and it goes to our limbs. And that's why your heart starts to beat a little bit faster. And that's why your palms start to get a little bit sweatier and your breathing might start to get more shallow. And that's when you have those moments that you go, oh, why did I do that? This is what I should have said. Those moments of regret. And I want you to not forget about those moments of regret. I want you to pause for a second. And anytime you are faced with one of those moments where the fear starts to creep in, I want you to pause and remember that last time. I want you to use that regret and use it as your energy for your next negotiation so that you don't go, you know what? I don't want to open too low. I don't want to miss that opportunity again. I don't want to feel like that again. And so that is channeling that mental pause button to go, I've got this. I prepared for this. I'm not going to let that same thing happen again. And when you can access that pause button, that's when the rational thought will come back in. And that's what allows you to have those moments where you go, this is exactly what I expected to do. This is exactly how I know how to handle these things. So being able to channel that mental pause button is going to be one of your predictors of success. In fact, I'll share one tool with you in terms of how to access that pause button. There was a fantastic study done back in 2013 back at Harvard, and they told people that they had to sing in front of a group. Now, I'm not a stranger to a microphone. In fact, I rather enjoy it. But I know that getting in front of a microphone is, I think, the number 2 fear, just behind death for most people all over the world. And so when they told these folks that, hey, you're going to have to sing in front of a group, they also told them, they split them into 3 groups. And they said, I want you to say one of these 3 things, regardless of how you're actually feeling. They told group number 1, I want you to tell yourself that you are anxious. And in group number 2, I want you to tell yourself that you are excited. And in group number 3, they said, don't say anything at all. And what they found was those who told themselves that they were excited outperformed the other 2 groups. And it's not that they had any greater vocal ability or anything like that. It was a computer that measured their volume and pitch. And this computer also put them through a math test and a speech test, and they outperformed the others there as well. So what they found was they were perceived as more confident, persuasive, and persistent, all because they said, I am excited. By taking themselves out of a fear mindset and putting themselves into an opportunity mindset, they changed their brains. And that is a predictor of success. So what if you could channel your pause button by going, I'm excited to finally see what I can get out of this situation. I'm excited to finally put all that preparation to good use. I'm excited to have this over with. Whatever your excited mantra is going to be. I'm excited to show them what I'm made of. I practice this with my nieces, by the way, who are still in school. And, we've been talking about this for years. My niece who gets very anxious about her upcoming test. I'm like, I'm excited for you to finally show your teachers how hard you worked studying right now. Those are the things that will get people in the mindset for greater success. So that's how you channel your mental pause button. You have to start with the mindset first, because too often people will say to me, can't I just put a little bug in my ear and you tell me what to say? And that would be so much fun for me. But it doesn't work, because what happens is we can read your face, first of all. We can see what's going on inside your brain, and you're sending us all sorts of subconscious messages. On top of that, when I tell you to say something, if you're not in the mindset, it's going to come out a jumbled mess. It's going to come out so garbled up that you're not going to look calm, cool, and confident. It's just not going to be believable if you haven't pressed that pause button first. And I'm going to give you another moment to channel your pause button for a second. One that I think is incredibly important for women. I want you to do a little exercise with me wherever you are. I want you to take your dominant index finger, and I want you to draw the capital letter E on your forehead. Okay, so dominant index finger, capital letter E on your forehead. Now, either you drew this letter so that it makes perfect sense to me. I can read your forehead as the observer and I can read it perfectly, or you drew it so that your own eyeballs can read it, but I would see it as backwards as the observer. Now, a study looked at this and went, one of these E's is associated with higher levels of power at work. The E that was drawn for your eyeballs that looks backwards to me, the likelihood of drawing an E like that goes up with the level of seniority in an organization. And so what that means is those who are drawing the E for themselves that I can't make any sense of are less are more self-focused. They're able to achieve their objectives. And that's, of course, why they get to the top of their fields. Those who drew the E that is backwards to their own eyeballs, but perfectly normal for a reader like me, those are the ones who are less self-focused. They tend to put others' needs ahead of their own, and they may put their own needs on the back burner. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here, by the way. I should tell you that. The reason I say that is because I have met plenty of folks who will draw the E for themselves and still never become the senior leaders they wish to be. Why? Because they've forgotten what the reflection of that E is like, what's in it for the other party. If you're trying to be a leader, you're essentially trying to get people to follow you and your ideas. You're trying to get people to agree with your ideas. But if you're not tapping into something of interest to them, you're not going to get very far. So a great leader and a negotiator knows how to flip that around. And for those who are drawing the E for me and others who are reading it, all is not lost. Don't worry. Because what that means is you have the ability to consider the needs of others. And that's perfectly acceptable. And it's a valid, useful skill as long as you don't put yourself on the back burner so much that you forget your own objectives. As long as you don't become what I call a victim of your own empathy. And I bring this up specifically for women's groups because very often, and I have these massive groups of people that I've done this with, and whenever I do this for a group of women, the majority of women statistically will draw the E for me and others. That's one of the reasons why, if I go back to what I told you at the very beginning with that spectrum, when we think of women as those collaborative, warm, win-win kind of people, that's where our empathy shines. That's why when companies are suffering and dealing with huge problems, they love having women at the helm to get them out of those problems, because it is that empathy that helps to find solutions, because you have that ability to go, what are they thinking right now? What would be valuable to them? What would be important to them? And how do I factor that into our plans to make this successful? So having that empathy is a useful skill. When it becomes your Achilles heel is when you will put your needs on the back burner for the sake of others without flipping that E back towards you. And so one of the tools I want you to pause and think about for a second is, what if you ask the question, what can they afford to do for me? If you are that person who draws the E for others, I want you to pause and ask the question, what can they afford to do for me? You're not asking them to go bankrupt. You're not trying to put them out of business. You are simply looking for a solution that is going to work for the both of you. You are taking that empathy. You are thinking about things from the other person's perspective. And remember that empathy is not agreement. Empathy means I can walk in your shoes and I can see where you're coming from. It doesn't mean I agree to what you're proposing right now. It means, okay, I understand why you did that. I'm still going to propose what I need to get this done, but at least I can do it in a way where I'm acknowledging you along the way. That's what empathy is. It's not agreement. So I don't want you to become a victim of your empathy. I want you to be able to use that, and so that you can pause to find your balance. Whichever E goes, pause to flip it around and consider, what are the needs of the other person? What are my needs and what can they afford to do for me? And being able to balance those two things. Now that you know your autopilot mode, you just did a little lesson in self-awareness. Now that you know your autopilot, make sure that you flip that E around. And that's what's going to make you a higher level negotiator. That's what's going to allow you to flip any way you want along the spectrum and do it with ease. Now I'm going to switch gears for a second. And I want you to think, please don't think about pink elephants. Whatever you do, please do not think about pink elephants. I'm begging you, just don't think about pink elephants. Now, if you were to tell me in the chat what you're thinking about, I suspect you're going to tell me you're thinking about pink elephants, because I've now anchored them onto your brain. It's impossible to disentangle that from your brain. That's how the subconscious works. And we're going to use that to our advantage in negotiation. This is a concept called anchoring. And if you can think of the way an anchor works on a boat, you drop the anchor. And when you drop the anchor, the purpose of it is, if there's winds in the middle of the night, you're not going to drift very far from that anchor. It's going to hold you in this relative, area here, instead of having you drift away at sea forever and waking up in the morning going, where the heck am I? So you drop that anchor so you stay in the general vicinity. We're going to do the same thing in negotiations. So when you think of a negotiation that you're going into, a high stakes negotiation, of course, one thing I haven't talked a great deal about is, because this is a no-brainer, you're going to have to prepare, right? Any type of negotiation, great negotiators don't wing it. Nobody goes, I'll just wait till I get in there and I'll figure it out. Those are the people who lose negotiations. Those are not the people who maximize negotiations. So it goes without saying, I expect every single person who's listening to this is going to be going in there well prepared for their negotiation. You're going to have done some market research on what is appropriate and what is competitive out there, whether it's a salary negotiation or an offering or a service that you're putting out there or the service that you're buying. You're going to know the stakes of what is normal, what is average, what is above average, and all that kind of stuff. You're going to be really well researched, so that when you go in there, you now get to show people how credible and authoritative you are by saying, based on my research or based on my knowledge of the industry. Then you get to drop the anchor and you go, based on this information I have at my fingertips, here's what I would expect, or here's my proposal for this situation that we're in right now. You've now dropped an anchor. They have a pink elephant on their brain. And when you do that, it's going to be so hard for them to not think about that pink elephant. They're going to have a hard time trying to drag you away from where you've just anchored. To give you an example, imagine you're going to a car dealership, wherever you are in the world. I've seen them operate almost exactly the same way. Imagine going to a used car dealership and you see a big giant sticker in the window with the price. Now, you've probably done your research and maybe you think this car is worth used $10,000, but you see this sticker in the window when you walk into the lot and it says $20,000 and you're going, oh my gosh, 20,000. How am I going to afford 20,000? How do I get them off of 20,000? How much lower can I get them from 20,000? The number you were thinking of in your head just went away because you're now focused. They've anchored you. They put this giant pink $20,000 elephant on your brain without even saying a word before the negotiation even started. So our brain is now toying with this $20,000 figure. It's a new pink elephant on our brain. You get to have that same impact by putting your proposal on the table first. If they've done it, if they tried to do that $20,000 elephant, I want you to press pause and go, wait a second, that's a tactic. I know what I came in here to do. I'm going to drop my own anchor and get them to dance around my anchor. And let's see how they do trying to drag me away from it. But your ability to anchor is what is going to create an advantage in negotiation. And I know what I'm telling you is unconventional. I know what I'm telling you sounds crazy. But the truth of the matter is study after study shows us that this is what gives people the advantage. And the only reason that you would do otherwise is if you're unprepared. If I've seen literature on negotiation where it tells you let the other person go first, but you know what that literature is based on? Stuff from the 1970s, before we had Google, before we had access to people all over the world. When we were going to car dealerships and you had to drive 5 hours to get to the next one because you couldn't just look things up online. You were not able to be as well prepared. But in today's day and age, where you have so much data at your fingertips, when you can call people up on the other side of the world instead of having to send them a letter and wait 2 weeks for it to arrive. I mean, this is in my own lifetime, by the way. These are the things that we now have at our disposal. So there's no excuse to not go in there well prepared. You have people you can talk to. You can Zoom with someone on the other side of the freaking world and find out what is going on in different markets. Stuff that wasn't available to us when the old advice was coming out. The new advice, the new research, and our new capabilities tell us you need to go first and you need to anchor because you are well prepared enough to do that. If you are not well enough prepared to do that, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to tell you what your circumstances are. Maybe you didn't have time, but that is your only excuse to not anchor first, because the fear most people have of going first is, what if I undersell it? What if I told them I needed $100,000 salary when they would have given me 120? Well, the only reason that would happen is if, because you were blind, you didn't know that 130 was the average going rate out there. But if you have PayScale and Glassdoor and academic resources and alumni and industry professionals and Twitter and all of these things at your fingertips, there's no reason for you to make that mistake. So I know I've harped on this for quite some time. Anchoring to be your best friend. When you are going in there well researched, you're going to look very credible and you're not going to be perceived as that B word and so on, because you're coming in authoritative. Here's another one. The most dangerous words in negotiation I hear are I think. I think this is what it's worth. I think I deserve this. Well, you know what? I think something totally different. So now what are we doing? If you tell me what you think and what I think, we're now arguing. But if you say based on this research, this is now third-party information. This is now credible. And this isn't opinion anymore. It's much more difficult to argue with facts. People still try to do it today, but it is much more difficult. But you can argue with opinions. So I'm suggesting you go in there well-researched and you say, based on the information I have at my fingertips, here's what I would expect, or here is my proposal for this solution going forward. So that is how you're going to have pause for perspective to go, hey, what can they afford to do for me? What do I know about my research? And how am I going to anchor how I want this to go? Where do I want to be on this, spectrum of negotiation? Do I just want to talk about cash and nothing else? Do I want to drag them away from talking about cash and start finding ways to grow the pie? Maybe I'm anchoring a way of working together. Hey, I want to make sure we cover today. We discussed this, and this. They might have been coming in only talking about salary, but now you just brought up flex time and remote work and covering cell phone bills and all of these other per diems and things like that, where you're now finding ways to grow the pie. You are now anchoring a style of negotiation that is going to serve you best, because you did the E exercise and you went, what can they afford to do for me? Now you go, I know they can afford to grow the pie, so I'm going to anchor how to do that. Right? This is all now starting to fit together in terms of pausing for that perspective. Now, I also want to talk a little bit more about communication and pausing to communicate. I told you the most dangerous words, but I also want to talk to you about some of the useful words that you can use. When it comes to communication, women especially tend to throw away their power using some dangerous words. And I'm going to give you an example. When you do something nice for someone and they say, thank you, they've now been really appreciative of that. They are acknowledging you've done something nice for them. The most common response, and you can go ahead and tell me in the chat if you agree, but the most common response I hear is, you're welcome, or no problem, or in Australia, I used to hear a lot, no worries. Those are the common things that, yeah, it's no issue. You're welcome. Please come back and just keep asking me for more. That is what you're telling people. If you are saying it was no problem, you're welcome to come back and take advantage of me whatever you want. No problem for me to work late. Feel free to ask me to do it 10 more times. And then you're looking around going, why am I the only one who's taking on all of this extra work? And it's because you had a moment of power and you threw it away. When they said thank you, that was your moment to use that power to your advantage, and not in a manipulative way. It's just making sure that you yourself don't get taken advantage. It's your time to now press that pause button and think about the E for a second. It's your opportunity to go, okay, they've acknowledged me. I'm not going to throw that away. I'm going to bank it. I'm going to make sure that they are cognizant of this. So what if, instead of no problem, my pleasure, what if you said, I appreciate that. I appreciate you acknowledging that. Or what if you took it even a step further and said, hey, I'm sure if roles were reversed, you would do the same for me. I'm sure if the shoe was on the other foot, you would do it happily. If you could say, hey, I'm sure you would do the same for me. Now you've just planted a pink elephant on their brain and you go, you know what? I would do the same for her. And the next time I have an opportunity to do something nice for Fotini, I am going to use it. It might be 6 minutes from now or 6 months from now, or even 6 years from now. But by saying, I'm sure you do the same for me, you are now registering that onto their brain, and they now feel obligated towards you instead of feeling as though, oh, it was no problem. So I'll keep going back. I don't feel guilty asking her to babysit one more time since she said it was no problem. You are now protecting yourself by making sure you don't throw that power away, but you can also take it a step further and create this sense of reciprocity. Something that in negotiation is going to become really useful. It's like putting money in the bank, but by making them acknowledge it instead of throwing it away and doing it in a very polite and diplomatic way, you are now banking that for later. You might not need to use it today, but now you don't have to feel guilty when you think, what can they afford to do for me? Yeah, they can afford to do that. I've done 10 other nice things for them. So there's money in the bank there I don't have to feel guilty about, because I've just banked it. I've made it available to them to afford to do it for me. And here's how this stuff can work. So there was a fun study that was done in restaurants where they looked at who gets better tips. So I know it's been a long time for some of us to have gone into restaurants, but if you can imagine, oftentimes when you go into a restaurant, you get the receipt. In North America, and actually most of the places that I go to, you get the receipt all over the world, and maybe they'll add a little candy or something for you at the end. In Greece it was ouzo candies. Here in North America it's usually peppermints, but they'll give you a little candy. And when you get a little candy, tips on average were 3% higher. And then they went, well, let's try this again. What if you get 2 candies? And they found tips increased to 14%. Because, you did that little extra thing that was nice for me. So as a consumer, as a customer, I feel like, let me do something nice for you too. 14% for 2 candies. Then they went, what if we give them a whole bowl of candies? And they found no difference. Because at some point there was a law of diminishing returns. 2 candies, 10 candies, it didn't make any difference. But then they tried it one more way. And they said, what if we do 1 candy? And then they walk away and they go, hey, you know what? You folks were such great customers. Here's another extra one just for you. When they did one candy and then gone back and added another candy, so now we're at two candies again, they found there was an increase of 23%. So we were at 14% before when we gave them two candies right out of the gate. But then we went to 23% by just going, hey, you know what? You guys are so great. Here's something extra. When the server was the first to give, it made the other person reciprocate and go, I should do something nice for them. They did something nice for me. I'm going to do something nice for them. When they made it personalized and unexpected, it increased it even further. Now, way back many years ago, when I first started my career, when I first came out of the MBA, I started working for a little company called L'Oreal. I was changing the world one lipstick at a time. And I was negotiating with Walmart, the biggest global retailer in the world. And I was constantly negotiating with the buyers over at the Walmart head office to promote my products over somebody else's. I was negotiating with them to go above and beyond and do extra flyers for me and all of these little things. But when I would talk to them about stuff, it wasn't when they'd ask me, because they asked me for stuff all the time. This is how they were. This is how successful they are. And they'd ask me to do these other things for them. I'd say, you know what, let me see what I can do. And I would go, I had to beg my head office in Montreal to do this, but I went to bat for you. It was so tough, but I told them how important you are to us. And here's what I got for you. I made it personalized and I made it unexpected. And as a result, I got so many things in that relationship. I got them to do so many more promotions. I was the first person they called when there was an opportunity. I hit it out of the park. When I was in that job, I was so successful at it that the buyer, when I was leaving, when I was quitting, she said, I wish all of my account managers were like you. That was the greatest compliment I can get, because these people do not give compliments easily. I say that not to gloat, but to show you how valuable it was, to make them feel like something was personalized and unexpected, as opposed to, yeah, we do this for everybody. Well, doesn't make me feel very special. And because of that, they felt obligated to do something special for me. That's how you create these opportunities. You are pausing for perspective. You are anchoring those opportunities. You are watching your language to not throw away those moments of power. And so here's some other ways that you can use your language to your advantage. If you are somebody who's really uncomfortable with negotiation, with that competitive side of things, here's language that's going to make any competitive type of situation, any cold type of situation, feel a lot warmer. And this is one of those things that will help you manage that stereotype of, why are you being so greedy? It will help you to smooth out some of those rough edges that people assume women have in negotiation. These are the 4 magic words of negotiation. Okay, so you ready for them? If you, then I. If you do this thing that I need, then I can do this thing that you need. Now, the order here is really important. I am forcing you to keep that E in check. That if you means, hey, what can you afford to do for me? If you do this thing that I need, I know you can afford to do for me, then I will leave you with this gift. If you reverse it, technically it still works, because you're saying, yeah, if you do this thing that I want, well, no, you're saying, I'll do this thing that you want, but only if you do this thing for me. Well, now it feels like a punishment instead of a reward. So take what you need first, turn that E for yourself, then finish with what they need. That'll keep the balance in check. That if you can do this thing that I need, then I'd be happy to do this thing that you need. And you can practice this every single day in low stakes and high stakes negotiations. If you can hold the door open for me, I'll grab you a coffee. If you go clean up your room, then I will take you to the mall. Any of those things will work. Start practicing having these words in your vocabulary, and they will feel much more automatic when you start to use them in business scenarios. If you can get that contract to me by the end of the day, then I would be happy to fire it off to your assistant or whatever it is. Or if you can get this signature on something, then I'd be happy to do that. If you can help me with this other thing that is clogging up my workspace, then I'd be happy to help you with this project that you want more help on, right? So think about how you can now use this transfer, this give and take language, this if you, then I language. In situations where it is getting quite tense, or you anticipate it's going to get quite tense, here's another little communication tool for you. Think about options. think about providing options to somebody. So you can have what's behind door number 1, you can have what's behind door number 2, or you can have what's behind door number 3. Providing options to somebody makes them feel as though they have some choice in this conversation, as opposed to having your choices forced down their throats. Now, you are the one creating these options. You're the one creating what's behind door number 1, 2, or 3, but they feel as though they had a choice in the matter. So for example, when I am babysitting my nieces, would you like the cauliflower, the broccoli, or the carrots? They're all vegetables. I chose them. I don't care which vegetable they choose. They're equal value to me. But now they feel as though they got to choose their own adventure because I provided them with the autonomy to feel like they're part of the solution instead of having it literally forced down their throats. And by providing those options, I can also ask follow-up questions and learn a little bit more and build out a better solution, or maybe even build a better solution for next time. So it's interesting. Why did you choose the cauliflower? What was it about door number 2 that you like? I don't like things that are green. Okay, well, so you didn't like you didn't like the broccoli, but what about between the broccoli and the carrots? Why did the cauliflower seem so much more appealing? Well, carrots are too hard; they hurt my teeth. Interesting to note. So next time I know, here is the E that I need to flip around to figure out how to continue to create solutions with you. So this option scenario, it may sound really basic, it may sound really trivial to you, but this is the one that I would say I use the most when I am getting hired by large organizations to help them through their big, huge, multi-million-dollar deals. When they're going in to negotiate with the type of folks at Walmart or an airline or a bank or whomever it is, we will come up with options. We'll say, okay, here's option number 1, option number 2, or option number 3. And inevitably, the person on the other side goes, I don't like any of those options. Okay, but which one should we start with? Which one is a good starting point for us to start working on and amending in such a way that it would make it appealing to you? They're like, okay, well, let's start with door number 2, but you're going to have to improve it significantly. I've now just learned by process of elimination, there was something behind door number 1 and door number 3 that they didn't like. Now I've learned without them having to tell me, without me having to pry, what that means to them, what their priorities are like. And now, again, what I've done is I've created 3 different anchors and I've anchored them and we're dancing around this place. They didn't have a chance to come up with option 12, which was in a whole other arena that I wasn't even willing to talk about. I'm still anchoring them in these areas that I want to play in. That is the opportunity you have by using your language and by using that communication, by pausing to think about this stuff, by pausing to think about that E and what can they afford to do for me and what's going to be valuable to them. And that's what's going to allow you to keep building that to get to a place that's a little bit more collaborative versus getting stuck in that competitive zone. It's being able to think about these types of things that will help get you a lot further. Now, I've tapped into something else, another communication tool that I haven't really dug into yet, but you might have noticed I've been using it consistently. And that is a part of a study, one of my favorite studies on negotiation, they compared expert and average negotiators. And one aspect of it was that looked at who asks more questions. And think about it for a second. Who do you think asks more questions? Do you think it's the experts or do you think it's the average? Well, according to this study, experts ask far more questions per hour than average negotiators do. That's not surprising, considering I've been sprinkling in questions all along the way, right? Even questions about the broccoli or questions about, candies and all of that kind of stuff. There's so many questions you can sprinkle in. What they found was questions work well for you in a number of ways, but they're particularly important for women. First of all, it's a great way to access your pause button and go, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say right now. Let me just ask a question and I'm going to buy myself some time to think. I'm going to buy some time for that rational thought to come back into my brain. Even if you know the answer to the question, you can buy yourself some time to create a little bit of a trusting environment, to create some dialogue with the other person, but really just buy yourself some time to think. If you do not know what to say, if things are getting very heated and you're worried you're going to say something that could ignite the other party, ask a question instead of making a statement. And it'll come off as less abrasive and it'll come off as less inflammatory. Questions are also a really great way when you get a no. No is not the end of the negotiation. No is the start of the negotiation. What if instead of just taking no for an answer, you asked a question? and you said, well, what could we do to make that happen? Under what circumstances could that work? How close can you get to my proposal? So instead of just saying, no, we can't do that, but how could you? Under what circumstances could that happen? Start thinking about questions that you can find to help them work around the no. And that'll keep the dialogue going. And you're going to find and uncover ways to, again, grow that pie and find ways to work together. And again, they're part of now the solution process instead of feeling like your solution is being forced on them. This is particularly important in terms of making sure that you have the control over being seen as assertive versus aggressive. You can get to the same place by using questions instead of statements. Now, I am careful about what questions I'm asking. I'm not asking yes or no questions because that can give the other party an opportunity to just shut things down. You don't want to give them an option to say no. You want to ask how or what questions so that you are opening up the conversation. Those open-ended questions are going to force some conversations, are going to force them to give you information. And I think we can all agree that information is power. So by asking those questions, you are now on the side of receiving all of this information. It is your opportunity to say less and get way more value and more power out of your relationships. And so you could say something abrasive like, the client will never go for that. But what if you asked a question instead and went, how do you think the client would respond to that? Now, all of a sudden, instead of calling you the B word, you've got them thinking about how would the client respond to that? Maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe I should change what I was going to do, right? So you can provoke their thinking, but do it in a way that is perceived as less aggressive without losing your credibility and without having to pass the baton to somebody else, right? This is how questions can help you look really credible and mitigate any of the potential things that could come up. And I use questions all the time, especially when I am faced with jerks and bullies. I call them my betcha moments because many years ago, when I was the only consultant on a team of men, mostly British men, I was 10 to 15 years younger than all of these men. I'd be traveling around the world. And every week I would end up sending my colleagues a series of emails with the words, bet you've never as the subject line. One week it was, bet you've never been mistaken for the hotel hostess instead of the facilitator. Another time it was, bet you've never been drunk dialed by a client because that happened. And another time it was, bet you've never been called little girl when you were running a workshop. And in each of those moments, those betcha moments, I could have flown off the handle. I could have launched into somebody. I was tempted to strangle someone. But instead of allowing all of that rage up inside me, I pressed my pause button and I used questions like to this client who said, called me little girl. Instead of responding to that and digging out my best playground insults, I could say, well, how does my age change the data that I'm presenting to you? Or how would my age affect the statistically proven cases that I'm presenting to you today? What about that would change things for you? And now he's on his back foot and he's feeling silly and he has nothing to say. But I'm not the one that was being aggressive. I'm not the one that was being a bully. And so this is my negotiation skills at work. We're having a negotiation over who is going to get airtime here, over who is going to be leading this session, over who is going to be credible and authoritative in this room. And by using my negotiation skills and by using those questions, I can deflate a situation that was getting quite intense. And so questions are a way for you, again, to manage all of those conversations. Now, I'm going to leave you with one more thought. In terms of, again, managing some of these uncomfortable situations, I'm going to leave you with one more little lesson that I think is particularly important for women, because we talk about these uncomfortable situations. And too often I see women trying to buy their way out of these uncomfortable situations. And what I mean by that is we want to be liked. That is, again, going back to our cave person ancestry. We are meant to move in a pack of people. We are not meant to be loners. So however much we hate to admit it, we need to be likable. This is innate. This is what's going on inside us. Now, how likable is another question, but we want people to like us, and to get out of those uncomfortable situations and to get people to like us. Too often, we give them things at our own expense. It sounds something like, well, I'll just give into that concession because I don't want them to hate me. I'll just do that little thing for them because, it's not important to me and I don't want them to hate me. And this happens all the time. It's like those, thank you moments where you're throwing away this power and you're actually throwing away value. You're making the pie smaller by doing this thing, all in the sake of likability. And likability for women is so freaking important that it is a double-edged sword. Women are stuck in a conundrum of likability because we need to be likable enough that people want to deal with us, but not so likable that people take advantage of us. And this is where I'm going to help you to delineate that a little bit. So there was a cool study that was done with Ivy League MBA students, and they put them into two different groups with two different sets of instructions. And they told the first group, I want you to get down to negotiating right away. And they told the second group, I want you to spend a few minutes before anything starts, just getting to know each other. And in that first group who got down to business immediately, 55% of them managed to close a deal. That's not too shabby. In the second group, where they had to get to know each other first, 90% managed to close a deal. Now, I know some of you are thinking, oh, sure, they probably got to know each other and they wanted to be liked, so they gave the other person what they wanted. Of course, that makes sense to me. Not true. How do I know? In that 90% group, not only did they strike way more deals, they closed deals that were 12% greater in value. So they closed better deals, all because they spent a few minutes before the negotiation even started getting to know each other. So if likability doesn't come from giving people everything that they want, and if you don't believe me, just look at a spoiled child. When they get everything that they want, they just get more and more irritating. You'd never want to babysit that kid again. So giving people everything that they want doesn't work, but getting to know them, well, that's a different story. According to Dr. Robert Cialdini, he's like the godfather of all things persuasion and influence. Likability comes from three things. It comes from having something in common. And it could be something quite simple. It could be, you like the color red? I love the color red. Having that familiarity makes them feel more comfortable with you, makes them want to deal with you. So that is the number one place where it comes from. The number two place where likability comes from is from genuine compliments before the business begins. And I say genuine because we can smell a rat. If you showed up here with bedhead today and I started complimenting you on your hair, you'd be going, what do you want from me, Fotini? And finally, the last place that likability comes from is from cooperative people. And so if you are taking that E and you are flipping it around, if you are asking questions and making them feel like they are part of the solution, if you are pausing to make sure that you don't say something that is going to be inflammatory, all of these are things that are going to make you appear to be more cooperative and are going to make people want to deal with you. So let that sink in. And instead of trying to buy the likability, use it to create better deals, to create more value. You now get to say less and get more out of your next conversation because you're going to say a little something that makes them want to deal with you. And then you get to sit back while they offer you more. They offer you more information and more value in your negotiations. My entire business exists today because I quit another job. It just wasn't serving me anymore. And then my clients called up and asked, Fotini, when are you going to come back to work with us? And I said, well, I don't work for that company anymore. They said, we didn't hire the company. We hired Fotini. We like dealing with you. And it wasn't because I was going in there boasting about my accomplishments and being all arrogant. And it wasn't because I was giving them massive discounts. I wasn't. It was because I listened to them. It was because I flipped the E around. It was because I was sitting back and letting them talk and they felt heard. And as a result, they wanted to deal with me. And I understood their interests and I could ask the question, what can they afford to do for me? And what would be valuable to them? And because I could have those conversations, because it took more time of me sitting there and listening and saying less, we were all getting more. I got an entirely new career that led me here to you. How freaking amazing is that? And so I hope that you take this away with you today. I hope that you remember to pause for perspective, anchor where you want to go. Think about that E and what you can get out of it. I hope you pause to communicate more effectively instead of throwing away those moments of power. It's using the words, magic words of if you then I. It's using those words that are going to get you a lot more out of those conversations and those questions. And then I hope you pause for that likability factor before you start giving stuff away in the hopes of being liked. Think about where likability actually does come from and how that can pave the road to a much easier negotiation for you and for the other party as well. So I've given you a lot to think about today. I know I speak very quickly and I'm very passionate about this stuff. It's like drinking from the fire hose whenever I open my mouth. But my hope is if you have questions and if you want to reach out more, you know how to reach me. I'm findable everywhere on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and I'm constantly sharing these snippets and my DMs are open for further questions. And I believe there'll be a recording of it on Leadership Global as well. But with that, I think I've left you with a lot. And so I'm going to pass the baton back to our host to wrap things up.
Thank you so much.